Legendary RPG writer Chris Avellone once said that narratives in games should be fun first, and then they can also have a theme when possible. If you think about it like that, the indie CRPG The Age of Decadence by Iron Tower Studio must be the best video game story ever. It has so many fun parts: Roman Empire, nuclear apocalypse, desert raiders, gladiatorial fights, Game of Thrones-like scheming and politicking, ancient Egyptian power armor straight out of Stargate SG-1. The Age of Decadence didn't achieve mainstream success. Some players disagreed with its design choices. It was highly systems-driven, with a steep difficulty curve. Additionally, it was developed before the rise of powerful and accessible video game engines like Unity, forcing the team to work with Torque 3D, a kiss of death. The studio's latest game, Colony Ship, takes place in a very different setting, with guns, cyborgs, and religious fanatics. Unlike The Age of Decadence, which focuses on a single character, in Colony Ship you can have a party of 4. The game we'll be playing today, Dungeon Rats, is a missing link between AOD and Colony Ship. It runs on the technology of the former, but has some of the same party-based mechanics of the latter. The plot of Dungeon Rats is about leading a slave rebellion and escaping a place called the Second Chance, a mine and a prison of House Aurelian. The game is a series of tactical battles, interspersed with character stories. Unlike the original Decadence, which was known for featuring a diverse set of social skills, Dungeon Rats strips that down to just one. You can think of it as Fallout Tactics of the Decadence verse. So it's like this. Once upon a time, a lore master, a scholar of ancient history, managed to obtain something he was not supposed to have. Isn't this how every one of these stories goes? It was a scroll describing a trial. The subject, a magus, accused of associating with foreign enemies of the Empire, as well as summoning demons and such. But it was the date of the trial that got the lore master all agitated. Almost 50 years after the Great War that turned much of the Empire into an irradiated wasteland. By then, the foreigners and their demons were long gone. He thought he was the only one clever enough to figure it out. And what happened then? On a quest to solve the mystery of the Magus, the lore master came to this place and volunteered for this here mining job and the free death sentence that goes with it. If it ain't the definition of a fool, kindly tell me what it is. Did he tell you how he thought he would escape? Sure, what else does a lore master do but talk? But none of it made any sense. Void dwellers that lurk in the darkness between the stars, human vessels and ghostly machines that only he could see. What's more, he told everyone he'd walk out of here a powerful man, the prison guards bowing down as he passed. Ha! Is that all they sent? I asked for 5 men. 5! How am I supposed to keep the ore coming if they don't give me enough men to clear the tunnels? The Second Chance mine operates on a strict hierarchy. The strong live closer to the surface, with access to sunlight, fresh air, and food, while the weak are pushed further down into the darkness. So, this is the proverbial rock bottom? Call it whatever you want. It's your home now. Our name is Juno, and we are a muscle for the man named Barca. Our job is to lead a goon squad to intimidate the workers. Marcus, another one of Barca's men, joins our party, and we venture forth. Here is Marcus' character sheet. He is quite good, has points in dodge and in hammers. Dodge is one of the 2 tanking skills. While less reliable than shield-based defense, it enables the use of 2-handed weapons. Since we gained a companion skilled with hammers, it makes sense to specialize our character in a different weapon. As one would expect from an Iron Tower product, some of the most important decisions in the game will be made on the character creation screen. The first key choice is determining how many points to allocate to charisma. The value of 8 allows us to play with a full party of 4 characters, but going all the way to 10 unlocks an option of recruiting 2 very interesting interesting companions in the second half of the game. Unfortunately, investing so many points in a single non-combat attribute makes us kind of incompetent at most other things. I did a bunch of test runs trying to make it work. Spear Juno was supposed to provide utility to the team by poking bad guys with a poisoned reach weapon. I found it to be unreliable. Panzer Juno, with minimal dex and perception but maxed constitution, proved effective for a time, hiding behind a tower shield and soaking up damage. However, even this approach failed eventually. We'll be playing as Crossbow Juno. Good perception, but no HP buffer whatsoever. She survives by not getting noticed by the AI. Let's talk about the basics of combat, since this is most of what this game is. We get to choose our initial placement on the yellow grid. Some battles are won by proper initial positioning. This enemy here is an archer, so it makes sense to place our group as far away from him as possible to minimize his hit chance. In rare instances, like this one, a charisma check is presented before the battle. Nothing personal, says one of the crossbowmen, switching to our side. His name is Ardomir, and he specializes in crossbows, throwing weapons, and critical strike. We'll focus on making him a crossbowman, as it minimizes the impact of his low strength. Throwing nets almost always land on target, reducing enemy action points and making them easier to hit. Lower AP means less incoming damage and fewer healing items used. So far, so good. The next task is a bug hunt. We are to kill the dangerous insects infesting the caves. This job is much harder, so we are allowed to conscript an additional miner. How did you end up here, Quintus? My only crime is that I served my lord honorably and followed him into battle. And we lost. Antidas fled. Those who could fled with him. Those who couldn't were captured. He did try to get us back, but he had no leverage, and Gallius didn't want to hand him more soldiers, so he sent us to rot in his mines. I spent most of my life here. Decadence Lore Primer. Antidas is a lord of a declining great house, and he has a role to play in A or D. Quintus is not great. He has an additional point in charisma, which is basically wasted. He is trained in swords and shields. Curiously, Dungeon Rats features no actual rats. That niche is filled by oversized ants instead. Their attacks are poisonous, dealing damage over time and applying a dodge penalty. This is annoying for Marcus, but less important for Quintus. Our prize is the Ant Kitten.
Shitin.
It's possible to manufacture basic armor out of it, which we'll do. This doesn't require having a forge nearby. Quintus met his end in a trivial battle against 3 ants near an oasis. But we have 2 more candidates to choose from. How did you end up here, Silas? A witch cursed us. That's when it all started. Me and my brother, we lived near a road, so every now and then we'll hide behind the rocks and wait for travelers. We were real smart about it, never went after the ones who could be trouble. And that's how we ran into that witch. She was trouble, all right. Was she really a witch? No doubt about it. We killed plenty of folks, so trust me, I know what I'm talking about. What happened then? I caught my brother stealing from me. Said he had a gambling debt. Now you tell me, what would make a good, honest man gambling and stealing from his own kin? Which brother was that again? The murderous highwayman? Weren't you listening? I've only had one brother. So I tapped him once to knock some sense into him, and he drops dead like he was waiting for it. I thought he was playing, but he wasn't. Dead as a doorknob, if not deader. That's when I knew I was cursed for sure. That's what they nailed me for, my brother's murder. I tried to tell them about the curse, but they didn't want to listen. Well, you seem qualified to watch my back. Come with me. Silas has points in spears and critical strike. Unfortunately, he too comes with a useless charisma point. This is a feature of all the campfire companions. He didn't survive a single battle. That's actually a fine outcome. He fulfilled his role as a damage sponge, and that way we don't have to share the experience points. Cyrus, the final available companion in Rock Bottom. I killed a levy collector. The son of a bitch kept waving his badge in my face, thinking it would protect him. It didn't. I put 2 bolts in his back. I thought the bastard was dead, but he lived long enough to name me. Cyrus is a passable but not amazing crossbowman. Will be developing his alchemy skill since I want to collect the plants near the oasis. Kadura leaves are plentiful, even underground. They are used to make poisons, which can be applied to weapons. But Juno, aren't the creatures in Rock Bottom immune to poison? Are they though? We're going back to Barca. Didn't I give you a task? The ants are gone. But did you get the queen? Barca is pretending to be overly concerned about it, cause they ain't gone until the queen is dead. Now that we've solved his problems, he is starting to suspect we might be a threat to his regime. I'll need some explosives. No way I'm going there empty-handed. He stares at us for a moment, as if making a hard decision, then signs and nods to one of his men. This is all I can spare. Use it wisely. The big choice of the game's opening act. We'll have to take down Barca eventually, but doing it early means we can claim his equipment before committing to the toughest underground battles. The trade-off? We'll need to burn extra consumables to win this fight early. I've been investing all of Marco's experience into dodge to ensure he can hold the line. We finish off Barca and then surround the remaining tanks and shoot them in the back. And that's how I became the boss of Rock Bottom. That was super weird to say out loud. Let's go see what's upstairs. The locals are tougher and better fed than the half-starved prisoners below, and they are certainly much better equipped. The difficulty of battles can dramatically depend on the party composition. Certain fights can be trivial for certain parties. The bad guys have 2 ranged characters, an archer and a guy throwing axes. For Panzer Juno, this battle wasn't very hard at all, but the crossbow-armed Zero Constitution Juno will have to get creative. Ranged opponents are the bane of low Constitution builds. We exhausted our remaining consumables and then carefully maneuvered the crossbows to keep maximum distance from the axemen. Was it all worth it? Yes. This place is called the Old Town. It's a Gothic reference, a huge central cavern at the heart of the Second Chance mine. Most of the game is about exploring side paths of the cavern. The prisoners from down below traveled with us, setting up a camp near an old smithy. Juno became the leader of the resistance. You'd best go where you came from. When they get the wind of it, they'll hunt you down like a dog, says Hieronymus the smith. I freed your ungrateful ass. They would have let me out in a day or 2. Now they'll think I was part of it. Hieron is not great at combat, but he has a bunch of points in crafting. This is not very useful for our specific build, because Juno will be the one filling that role. Sure, I'll join you. I was quite a warrior back in my day, you know. I've killed just about everything that walks or crawls at one time or another. That's how I ended up here in the first place. With access to a smithy, it's time to get to work. A clever mechanic. The compact hand crossbows can be placed in bag slots, which are normally reserved for bombs and potions. This allows us to fire 3 arrows in the opening turn without reloading. Our other crossbow-wielding companion will require the same set of equipment. So, Ardomir, how did you end up here? Raided one caravan too many. I knew it was coming. The Imperial Guards are supposed to keep the roads safe, but that's the last thing they want to do. They want to keep the pressure on the cities. So we kept raiding until the Commercium decided it was cheaper to pay the guards to put an end to it, rather than suffer further losses. We thought we'd do one last raid and then slip into the wasteland. Turns out it really was our last raid. Decadence Lore Primer. The Imperial Army is a joinable faction in the main game. The first quest they give you is to dress up as raiders and rob a trading caravan. It occurred to me that we know almost nothing about our buddy Marcus. How did you end up here? Ever heard about old Tully? He ran the 40 Thieves branch in Tehran, and I was his right-hand man. Then Tully got into a quarrel, thinking the guards would back him up, as he's been paying them fuckers for years. Only they didn't. Things got ugly. They raided the tavern, nailed Tully to the door, and sent everyone who was loyal to him on a one-way trip to this shithole. A huge advantage of conquering the smithy early is that you won't be ammunition-starved while exploring the lower caves. Yes, we're going back. As a service to the community, we'll find and kill the Ant Queen Barker was talking about. The creature fights down here are the weakest part of the game, and I'm glad our relatively advanced equipment allows us to trivialize them. We see several prisoners armed with pickaxes and determination. This is a very entertaining fight. The miners aren't wearing any armor, which makes them susceptible to barbed arrows, a type of projectile that has low armor penetration but does fantastic damage. Human battles are always narratively and mechanically superior to creature battles. So, how did you end up here, Hieronymus? I've been here for almost 3 decades. The first few years, plotting revenge on my enemies was all I could think of, but then the years went by and my thoughts turned to settling down with a wife, maybe buying a small smithy and living a peaceful life. I gave up on that too, a long time ago. So they have like a state down here with property rights. You said you were a fighter. I joined the Imperial Guards when I was 15. Spent the next 10 years in the wasteland fighting the Ordu. I went back to Maador and a Centurion, fancy helmet and all. 3 months later I was here. I miss that helmet the most. Ordu are the Mongol-like neighbors of the Empire, and dealing with them is a major plot point in the Imperial Guard's storyline in AOD. We replenish our supply of arrows and move on. It's time for our comfy little state to expand its borders. The underground river is controlled by one of the 3 gangs of the triumvirate that rules the mine. We are surrounded by a crowd. A dark-haired woman seems to be in charge. Her name is Roxana. Chain 'em up, boys. Roxana is an expert markswoman who fires bolts at us from beyond the barricade. While it's technically possible to take her out, this is strongly discouraged for reasons that will become apparent very soon. Our party composition is vulnerable to archers, so my strategy is to retreat back into the cave while Marcus draws everybody's attention. We'll pick them off from range. No need for aimed shots, since they're all unarmored. Once we kill the locals, Roxana flees. The subsequent fight is very similar, except there are even more archers now and nowhere to flee. If Panzer Juno were present, we would position her at the center of the battlefield, where she could neutralize most threats simply by standing perfectly still. But for a ranged party, the strategy is less eloquent. We have to DPS them before they do the same to us. Save scum the first turn until you get good rolls and the bad guys miss all their shots. Sun Tzu said this. Once we take care of her henchmen, Roxana flees again. Heal everyone to full, because the next fight is where many people seem to quit this game. "There you are," shouts Rinard. "I knew you'd come. What do you have to offer? I didn't come here to bargain. Think you can take me? You wanna play rough?" So here is the breakdown. This is Ordu Archer. He's deadly from range. Rinard and his ally with a reach weapon can dish out a lot of damage. This shielded enemy spawns behind us and he's difficult to bring down quickly. But the most important figure on the board is the Alchemist here. He throws explosives with perfect accuracy. My strategy is to ignore everyone else and prioritize the Alchemist. His removal significantly reduces the threat. I gave all our explosives and napalm to Cyrus, who was lagging behind the group skill-wise and wasn't that great at conventional combat to begin with. He takes a shot at Rinard with 96% chance to hit and misses. Cyrus didn't make it. Juno puts a bolt in Reinhard's temple. Good night, sweet prince. Vengeance for Cyrus. This could have gone much worse. The people of the mine are following us deeper into the caves, establishing another forward base. And I was wondering where she was. I guess this is what they do to those who disappoint Rinard. Are you the new boss? You are not. You are going to fight your way out of here. Take me with you. You are going to need all the help you can get. Roxana has fantastic stats. She is one of the best companions in the game, and it's a small miracle she is not locked behind the meanest stat check you've ever seen. Roxana excels in dodge, has some skill with daggers, and is highly proficient in crossbows and throwing weapons. Given her slightly above average strength, throwing weapons are my preferred choice. So how did you end up here? Politics. I killed a man who was off limits. Darista warned me, but I didn't listen. Never did like that bitch. That's not much of a story. You want a story? I was with the boatman of Styx in Mardoran. It's a big city, no shortage of people someone wants dead. Decadence vs. Lore Primer. The boatmen are the legal assassins guild and a very fun career path in the first game. So one day, Lorenzo of House Kalani asks me to take care of someone for her. She's a good client, plenty of money and enemies. I run the contract by Hamza, who gives me his go-ahead, but that fucking bitch says no. But you killed him anyway. I didn't join the boatmen to take orders from that no-name bitch. I had to make a point. To be honest, I thought I would get Darista in trouble with Galius, maybe even get her thrown out from the guild. But boy was I wrong. She joins the group in place of Cyrus. We'll be meeting even more interesting people very soon. The caves ahead are crawling with giant insects, but they're nothing we haven't seen before. Unfortunately, without an alchemist, we can't make use of the plants growing near the river, but this problem will solve itself very soon. We spot a man fending off several scorpions. If we choose to rush to his aid, the battle will play out like this. Obviously, the first thing we do is make Juno flee. The stranger is more than capable of dealing with a single creature. I'm in your debt. So, who are you? Call me Ismail. Probably not his real name, not that it matters. He has points in dodge, although not as many as Roxana or Marcus. Ismail is also proficient with swords, critical strike, and bows. He is quite flexible. Most notably, he has 6 points in Alchemy, which is excellent. We'll bring him along in place of Ardomir, for now. How did you end up here? It's a long story. I've got time. Have you heard about the siege of Asmara? It was the biggest payday for every mercenary company in a 1,000-mile radius. After 2 years, Asmara finally fell. Few companies that made it to the end were owed a fortune. I guess it was much cheaper to pay the vultures to finish them off. The vultures? Men without honor. Mercenaries who wait until the fighting is done to attack the survivors. You think mercenaries have honor? Honor doesn't come with a job, it comes from within. One can make a living by stealing from others and still be more honorable than those he steals from. And then what? I made too much noise and the paymaster was too stubborn, so it took him a while to tell me where he kept the money. When I was done, the house was surrounded by guards. The game introduces a new enemy type. Hiding behind a scolopendra is an aggressive carnivorous plant. The plants are stationary, but they fire poisonous darts. For a group with multiple ranged characters, they're easy targets. And defeating one provides a valuable regent used to craft a potent healing salve. Battles against fauna can be very rewarding, provided you can reliably take down one plant per turn and have the means to depoison yourself. For Panzer Juno with a tower shield, this battle was an actual joke. The game makes us face a single worm first, so that we can study the creature and find its weaknesses. I am no biologist, but I think the weakness is getting shot with bolts. There are only 2 worm fights in the whole game, and the other one is way too hard for us at this time. Thanks to his developed intellect, Ismail gained enough experience points to increase his alchemy skill to 8. He can craft all sorts of advanced bombs and napalm grenades, and most important of all, deadly poisons, a critical part of my combat strategy going forward. An advantage of throwing weapons is that they can be both poisoned and sharpened. From now on, Roxana's job in almost every battle is to distribute poison among our enemies, usually by targeting their arms or legs, which also applies a debuff to their accuracy or dodge. This is very effective. Let's face the leader of this war band, gang, whatever their name is. Democritus sent me to kill you, says Yngvar. If I bring him your head, I will have anything I want. I hardly know what to ask for, as there is so much one can have here. The charisma score of 8 unlocks all party slots. The charisma score of 9 allows you to recruit Yngvar. Join me, and together we'll fight our way out of here. Even if you get past the Emperor and his men, you won't get past the guards in the keep. They're like starved dogs, waiting for the chance to cleanse this mine from vermin. He nods at his companions, who don't seem to appreciate his sense of humor. They bleed and die like everyone else. This is your only chance, and you know it. You're right. This is my only chance. Tell Democritus I've got a better offer. You're a dead man, Yngvar, fucking traitor. The camp moves once again. We're getting closer to the surface with each migration. This passage here leads back to the old town. The elevator attendant is nowhere to be found. It's hard to find good help nowadays. Yngvar is a skilled axe fighter with points in shield and critical strike. He's a better tank than Marcus. It's time to ask him the question. How did you end up here? I've only been here for a few months, and I've already heard every imaginable story and excuse. Me, I have no excuses to give you. I killed the wrong men, same as every other poor bastard in here. The wrong men? You can kill 10 men and nobody would bat an eye. You kill a worm who serves a powerful man, and now you are a murderer who has to pay for his crimes. You call that justice? We are civilized people, not savages. Well, I am a savage, and I'm getting restless sitting here doing nothing. Let's get to work then. The battlefield is packed. 3 archers on one side, 2 on the other. Directly ahead is a heavily armored warrior with a tower shield, and this here is another bad guy, armed with a spear. Yngvar can handle the right side of the battlefield as well as the center, while Marcus will keep the 3 archers occupied. If they try to reposition, Juno and Roxana are ready to intercept. A clever trap, but honestly it's easier than it looks, though Marcus ends up taking a lot of damage. The man before us is a giant. I am Democritus, the judge. My father gave me this name, hoping I'll choose the quill. I chose the hammer instead. One of my favorite battles, very interesting anatomy. This opponent is a classic D&D rogue, specializing in high damage critical strikes. This guy wields a spear with impressive armor-piercing capabilities. The Ordu has a repeating crossbow, a weapon seemingly designed to bully Juno specifically. And then you have the 2 fighters in the middle. Democritus wields a 2-handed hammer and is capable of killing most of our party members in a turn. So it's best that he never gets that turn. Roxana got trapped in a throwing net, preventing her from using her poisons and debuffs. Looks like it's time to pull out the weapon of last resort. Never gets old when something blows up. Kneel, for you stand before Lucius Valerius Scaurus, a fallen Praetor of a fallen house. Decadence Lore Primer. A Praetor is one of the career choices in the Age of Decadence. It's a knight, a warrior from high society who serves a great house. I don't see any legions here. I see an old man reminiscing about his glory days, and some convicts pretending to be Praetors for his amusement. Despite Juno's verbal owns, Scaurus is an exceptionally well-trained and equipped warrior, as Praetors are known to be. The archers in the back, even with the advantage of the barricade, are easily humiliated by Roxana. Actually, everyone here is. We soften the frontliners with bombs, distribute poison. 1, 2, 3. Our new base of operations. This place looks almost livable. So, what are you going to do when we get out? Kador runs the guild now. I'm gonna pay him a visit, see if he can clarify a few things for me. I had a lot of time to think about it, and I have some questions. Like, how he became a new guild master instead of being sent here with the rest of us. Lore primer. Kador is an important character in the Thieves storyline in the Age of Decadence. We are once again in the Old Town Central Cavern. I love the music. Ah, good. I've been waiting for you. I think you've done quite enough damage. He draws a gladius and for a moment inspects the edge of the black blade. And to your misfortune, the Emperor agrees. This man is the actual Praetor. And you think you can stop me? I'm going to try. They should have smacked you down the moment you crawled from the lower caves, but instead they were greedy and lay about casting wagers on how many of their rivals you would kill. One consolidation is that if I fall, the Emperor will deal with you himself. Is that supposed to frighten me? It should. He was the champion of Doran once, the best gladiator the city of all cities had ever seen, and that was before the ritual. What ritual? A year ago or so, a lore master arrived in the mine, a scholar of ancient history. He had no belongings, but in place of his right eye, there was a gem. He said this gem was an artifact of the old times, and with it he could look into places no other could see. He led us to a chamber in the rock, completely sealed and not on any of our tunnels. After that, I no longer believed he ended up here because of some gambling debt. He knew too much. The chamber was a prison for a demon, a hideous creature with stone skin. On the lore master's orders, we were commanded not to kill, but to overpower the monster, for he needed the monster's heart undamaged. Lore primer. In the Decadence verse, operating pre-war machinery is done with a specialized controller, making the process resemble playing a VR game. So the lore master was working with invisible tech, not paying attention to the world around him. Mistaking this for disrespect, the Emperor hit the man, killing him instantly. The Emperor then forcibly tore out the mystical eye and attempted to look through it himself. The moment he did, the eye activated and embedded itself within his skull. Blood was still ticking down his chin when he looked around for the first time and saw. And then the ritual began. We face 7 combatants. The ranged attacker is armed with a rare double crossbow. This is a rogue capable of devastating critical strikes. Yngvar handles him better than Marcus. The Praetor has an extremely valuable sky metal sword, the highest tier of equipment in the game. It's even better than blue steel. The easiest way of winning the battle is by creating a wall of fire between ourselves and the enemy mass. Then we apply strong poison to everyone via Roxana, and by the time the flames fade, the bad guys have no life in them. On the Praetor's body, we find a strange blue sphere. Curious. The elevator to the Emperor's domain is inaccessible. We'll have to find an alternative way in. A hideous statue, a metal spider, a mechanical construct straight out of some sorcerer's nightmare. The idea behind the constructs is that they are near impossible to tank. You win by shaping the battlefield with napalm to make sure you are fighting one construct at a time. This is where Panzer Juno met her end, but we fared okay. An ancient Magi lab. The lights are still on. The battle pits us against 2 high-tier constructs and a robot archer. Positioning is crucial. Place a shield character at the front to block incoming arrows and protect the group. How to play this without a shield, I have no idea. The real surprise is that ranged constructs are very dangerous in melee. Don't let your guard down. That's the demon that got his heart stolen. We insert the glowing sphere. I live again. What are you? The one who calls himself Emperor. Does he still live? Yes. Good. I shall kill him myself. Join me. Join you? The demon seems puzzled and confused. Alone, you don't stand a chance, no matter how mighty you are, or once were. Join me, and together we'll make them pay for what they did. You remind me of my master. You have the same arrogance and misplaced faith in your own power. The ancient guardian joins the party. Here is the stat sheet. Maxed out critical strike, maxed out dodge, maxed out swords. We can't customize his equipment. We can't give him this sky metal gladius we found earlier. A very serious limitation is that he cannot be healed. All the damage he takes is permanent. The guardian, however, can gain experience and increase his skills even further. What are you? You wouldn't understand. Try me. Try you? What do you know about biochemistry? I, and others like me, were created by your ancestors, men of great learning and greater ability. Was your master a prisoner here? A prisoner? No. He built this facility deep under mountains to ensure it would survive any attack. He knew of the ore deposits, but had no interest in them. The local crystals, however, have excellent superconductive properties. The Emperor's palace is just ahead. A hulking man paces back and forth, yelling at his terrified servants in a language they don't understand. The Magus? Where is he hiding? I don't know any Magus. Your lies will buy you nothing, for he speaks to me even now. He has promised to guide me through the ritual. Kill them all and bring me the heart. The music for the Emperor fight is more dramatic. Let's take a look at what we're dealing with. 3 ranged attackers behind a palisade, a crossbowman, an archer, and a valet. This individual also attempts to use throwing weapons, but he is not good at this and will fail to land a single hit. The Ordu warrior has a napalm potion, and this here is a DPS man armed with a 2-handed axe. The Emperor, once the champion of the arena, was enhanced by the beings from the void. This grants him the ability to regenerate health every turn. With so many ranged attackers on the field and no way to retreat, you'd think this would be a disaster for Juno. Well, we can solve this problem by placing our warriors closer to the archers, giving them a better targets to shoot. Roxana distributes poison and debuffs, as always. Juno throws napalm to prevent other melee attackers from helping the Emperor. The demon has 3 unique attacks. The more AP you invest, the more accurate they seem to be. The Emperor is heavily armored, but poison and bleeding work pretty well, as do critical strikes. A fine battle. The brute is dead. His palace belongs to us now. One last obstacle stands between us and our freedom, the Aurelian guards at the fort above. And we are ready to face them, but we won't. Not yet. There is one final party member I want to showcase. The construct can be reanimated with a crafting skill of 8. It seems that its identification system has been reset and it can't tell a friend from a foe, but it will fight back if attacked, which makes it a perfect traveling companion. It's quite strong. Like the demon, the construct cannot recover HP, so all the damage it takes is permanent. Unfortunately, the developers didn't anticipate players backtracking to explore the underground after defeating the Emperor. The game thinks we're battling the guards on the surface. Thankfully, I have developed something of a 6th sense when it comes to grog RPGs, so I made a backup save in the Emperor's palace. No more delays. Let's go earn our freedom. The prisoners are escaping, shouts the guard, nearly choking on his wine. Initially, we faced 3 Aurelian legionnaires, a tank, a spearman, and an archer. The gimmick of this battle is in its phased structure. After a few turns, the doors of the barracks will open and 2 additional legionnaires will join the fight, and then more will emerge from the other building. It's very important to preserve the demon's HP. He is a critical part of our formation. The Guardian is the key to all this. They bleed and die like everyone else. We've done it! The fort is ours. Slowly the prisoners emerge from the mine, seeing sunlight for the first time in years, if not decades. I assume my men are dead. His 2 bodyguards regard us with indifference, as if what happened outside the office doesn't concern them at all. You won't get far. The reinforcements are already en route. How did they get here so quickly? They aren't here for you. There was a disturbance a while back. It was reported to House Aurelian as per protocol. What kind of disturbance? The kind that gives the Aurelian lore masters nightmares. I am not at liberty to say more. So if they ain't here for me, you don't understand. The nature of this disturbance. It can be anyone, and you can't tell who it is until it's too late. They won't take any chances. Your guards are wearing blue steel armor. That's a bit rich, isn't it? They are not my guards. Our job is to protect the Prefectus and keep him safe until he is properly questioned. The rest is not our problem. You are not our problem. Nod if you understand me. So these guys are like the House Aurelian Secret Service. You know, the demon seems to think his master was dead or gone, but the Emperor and the entity advising him was convinced that the Magus was still alive. Curious. I'm probably reading way too much into this, but it would be fun if the game had a side plot where a secret Magus was still alive and you had to figure out who among your companions it is. You gotta hand it to them. The XCOMs weren't at all scared of the ancient demon. Wait, don't kill me! I can show you a way out! There is an ancient portal in the basement. The power tube is damaged. Its magic is all but drained, but it should have enough charge to transport 1 person. You can step through the portal, destination unknown, leaving the prison and everyone else behind. No thanks. We are not running away. Let's take a look at what we are dealing with. 100 men. Looks like a detachment of the 6th Legion of House Aurelian. This is not a full legion, so we might have a chance. Before initiating the final battle, make sure all companions are equipped with the best gear, even those not in your active party. The unique mechanic of this fight is that when a character falls, the next most powerful member of the roster automatically steps in. The enemy will advance in waves, and the game will autosave after each encounter. Note that you cannot heal between battles. Wave 1. An archer, a valet, and 4 melee fighters, all but 1 armed with 2-handers. Roxana is extra strong in this fight. It's very easy to apply poison and debuffs to every enemy on the field. The demon ensures their swift passage to the next world. Wave 2. Turtle Formation. A group of heavily armored, slow-moving legionnaires with tower shields. While they have no archers, most of these guys are equipped with javelins. Turtle is simply not a good strategy against a throwing weapons expert and a poisoner like Roxana. She can probably solo this. Welcome to the colony. No more than 40 men remain on the other end of the bridge. Unfortunately, it's more than we can handle at this stage, but the Aurelians don't know that. Let's go have a little chat with the Centurion. What do you want? It's over. You don't have enough men to take the fort. Why throw your lives away? What choice do we have? If we go back, every 3rd man will be crucified. Look on the bright side. 2 out of 3 will live. Juno is in her dark era. All right, says the Centurion, but you are coming with us. That's the price. Your life for theirs. The Centurion is in his dark era as well. There is a final charisma check where you can talk them out of attacking, but that feels anticlimactic. Wave 3. Valets and 2-handers. This is not about finishing us off, this is about degrading our resources before the hammer strikes. The hardest fights are still ahead, so make sure you don't waste too much of the demon's HP. In other words, don't do what I did. Wave 4. A shield wall of legionnaires flanked by 2 archers. Note that Archer 1 is much easier to kill than Archer 2. This is a hard battle, and I tried a bunch of strategies. The one that worked was charging our fatally wounded demon across the field towards Archer 2. Even without the HP buffer, he still managed to hold off the legionnaires for a few turns, giving us enough time to weaken them with poison. Eventually, the demon gets cornered. I'm gonna butcher the rest of the 6th Legion for this. Marcus enters the field. Welcome back. Wave 5. The Centurion himself graces us with his presence. The battlefield is beautifully unreadable as it's covered with bodies. 3 archers, 3 shielded melee warriors. With the demon defeated, Yngvar takes over, holding the enemy melee attackers at bay while we bombard them with projectiles. Yngvar can withstand their regular attacks no problem, but the bleeding effect is a major concern. Marcus is throwing acid vials to reduce the enemy armor threshold. Death is the only freedom a slave knows. Goodbye, Yngvar. Hello, Ardomir. Long time no see. Ultimately, the battle was decided by Ismail's black powder explosives. It's over. For now. But Lord Gallius won't stop looking for us. We can never return to the cities. But unlike the old empire, the vastness of the wasteland has no borders. It will be easy enough to disappear. And that was Dungeon Rats. Finally playing this to completion was like discovering a secret Decadence game hidden in plain sight. Of course, there is nothing actually secret about it, it's just not talked about as much. If you happen to enjoy combat in Iron Tower games, this is the best implementation of their ideas. I felt it often gave me more tactical options than Colony Ship. And it has violent death animations the sci-fi game lacks. Should you buy this? If you own the other 2 games, then yes. If you don't, then you should probably get Colony Ship instead. Yes, the sci-fi setting is different, but Iron Tower have a strong voice. All their games are really the same game, and I mean this in the best possible way. Patron credits, and then we'll see what happens when you step through the XCOM portal. These videos are generously supported by our patrons, including Jim Lawrence, Frog, Arkelis, Snafu, Rinard, a 2-room apartment in Bobruisk, Belarus. I feed my parrot chicken, Darkbot Pumpkin, Front Stab, Dmitry U, Smoking Skooma in the Bad Bath and Balmora parking lot, Billy Strayhorn, Haim Rowan, Celtic, Yuri Solodovnichenko, Maciej V, Ilya Rubin, Azazel and Baneful the Doggo, Moppo, Ganso Bomber Motherfucker, E-Girl 666, Mada Pasta, Ezek Tserve, Yevgeny Veris Yevgeny, Danny Kilpatrick, Sylvain Pascu, Tony Spagani, and C6. Beyond the portal is Kantar, the nation that fought the Empire in the Great War. Surprisingly, the city we arrive in is densely populated, and the locals appear to be performing the same demon summoning rituals that originally caused the Great Conflict. The war was fought on the Empire's territory. Even though the Kantari were eventually defeated, their own land wasn't touched by the war and didn't suffer any devastation. This is a 2017 forums post by Vince. We wanted to show you something different in the potential sequel, not more of the same with a different flavor. We had plans for a sequel, but the Age of Decadence didn't sell enough, less than 10% of what Darkest Dungeon sold, so we had to put these plans aside, at least for now. In the sequel, you'd join an expedition sent by House Aurelian shortly before the events of the first game. As in AOD, you'd be able to pick a different background, a Praetor representing House Aurelian, a thief chained to the galley, a merchant representing the Commercium and tasked with establishing a trade trading outpost, a merc hired to protect the expedition, a boatman assigned to the Praetor, etc. Again, these are old posts, so I don't believe the Aztec Decadence is in the project at this time. Still, I want to gently criticize this idea. I think sticking to the Roman fantasy is important. Desert raiders, nuclear-armed warships, Roman legions, ancient machines, alien visitors. This setting is one of a kind. It's a treasure. Here is my pitch for the Age of Decadence sequel. One day, a masked traveler arrives at the gates of Maadoran, the city of cities. With them, they have nothing but a bag of rocks. A week ago, a traveler on the road told them that a lore master was seen performing their grift before a crowd in the capital, boasting a power to reanimate old technology. It's a long shot, yes, but we owe it to our friend to at least try. Anyways, this was the last video of the year. Next up, we are going home.